As is probably the case for almost every local rider, I'm normally happy to leave the noise and car exhaust of US 36 behind me. The road serves merely as a means to another destination. Given the bright blue sky and warming rays of sunshine, I was just another one of 1,000 or more cyclists taking advantage of perfect riding weather on October 18th, 2014. That day, I thought it was odd that despite being on the busiest road I'd travel as part of my ride, it was my favorite section. Maybe the rolling terrain was simply more engaging than the straight roads ahead, or maybe it was the patches of sun that warmed me through my vest. Whatever it was, I specifically remember being calm, content, and proud of my willpower to push through what would be a hard ride. Still gauging my speed, I naturally slowed on the climbs, picked up my pace during the flat sections, and relaxed when I had the momentum of going downhill. Trying to keep my effort consistent, I ended up playing an irritating game of leapfrog with another cyclist. I passed him on a downhill only to have him come around me shortly after. Within a few minutes, I was in front again. I later learned that the guy who had been trading spots with was Scott, an important witness and nearly a second crash victim. After passing Scott the second time, I tucked into my aero bars and took a deep breath. The upcoming section of road, which heads north into the town of Lyons, was my last downhill to rest until the next lap around. As I approached the junction of US 36 and Hygiene Road, a 2-lane country road off to the right, I moved left from the shoulder of US 36 into the right-hand turn lane that existed for those traveling east onto Hygiene Road. Moving into the turn lane would deter cars from cutting me off with a right hook, while also providing a straight, safe trajectory through the intersection and back to the highway's shoulder again. Since US 36 is a larger road, there is no stop sign for north or southbound traffic. Only cars approaching from Hygiene have to stop in order to get to US 36. Those defensive riding tactics had become second nature to me. I knew the rules of the road and that my movement into the center of the turn lane clearly told drivers my intentions. When I was 50 feet out from the intersection, a large red obstacle appeared in my vision. I knew it was a car, but it drove several feet past the stop sign so abruptly that when it stopped directly in my lane of traffic, my situation was momentarily surreal. Given that I was on a 6% downhill, my speed was around 35 miles per hour. My hands jumped up from the aero bars to my bullhorns, the standard place for a person's hands to rest on a bicycle, where I grasped the brakes so tightly that they locked against the rims of my wheels. Slowing wasn't a good enough option. I needed to stop. The feeling of my rear tires skidding out from underneath me sent an electrifying sense of panic throughout my body. I knew my control was gone, that I could no longer correct the situation, and that I was going down. My mind went blank. When my body slammed into the red Fiat, Scott was behind me by mere seconds. With those extra moments, he was able to swerve to the left and into the other lane, narrowly avoiding the red car and oncoming traffic. Behind him, tires screeched as another car swerved to miss the Fiat. While I don't recall impact, I know I went straight through the driver's side window. My face shattered the glass into thousands of shards. Those pieces sliced my face open before they settled onto the vehicle seats between the folds of the stick shift and across the soon-to-be bloody black top. In addition to the driver, there were 2 passengers in the Fiat, drivers from other cars and nearby cyclists who watched the scene unravel. One passenger of the Fiat, Brian Clifford, jumped out of the car and ran to my side. He pressed a blue and white plaid shirt against what was left of my cheekbone. The driver, Larry Rush, was shaken and stood back. Away from the chaos, my clear water bottle with a yellow cap came to a stop down the hill. Kennett, who is a key character in this book, he's my now husband. He was my boyfriend that morning. I'll just tell you that at the time. Kennett had filled the water bottle for me earlier that morning. Seeing it would be his first sign that something was amiss. I had to get tested by a neurologist after my crash, but it was just kind of like a general thing to do because there was ongoing legal case. And I remember her calling and telling me that I had PTSD. And I was like, I'm back on my bike. I'm like, it's not that bad. And I don't have it. And she was like, no, you do. She's like, guess the test, like there is like a kind of yes or no. And I kind of argued with her and put it out of my head because I think, and I watch other athletes do this. I think it's just this like driven, just like doesn't affect me. I'm going to go for it. And I actually was in Tucson several years ago and I just hit a pothole while I was drinking my water bottle and crashed and broke my elbow. And it was entirely my fault. Didn't have a car around me. And I made it to the gas station down the road and it was no big deal. And I was making jokes, trying to help everyone else around me feel comfortable. And then in the days and weeks and months after, I became extremely angry at the situation. And it was to an irrational level. And so I went back and trauma therapy was recommended to me. And I did brain spotting for several months. It's kind of, brain spotting is a type of trauma therapy. There's a few different types. But throughout the brain spotting, the therapist would encourage me, like, don't push it, ride inside if you have to. And I spent a lot of that year riding inside more. And then, I didn't fully buy into the therapy. But then I started to ride outside more and started to realize that I was more relaxed and I was less just triggered by things. But I can ride now and I know what days, like some days I can think of a ride I did this past summer with a friend of mine. And I was riding on the outside and the whole time I just felt like I was checking behind my shoulder for every car. And it was so weird because often I get triggered by something coming at me from the right because that's the experience where I was hit. But I just noticed that I was too tense on that ride and I didn't like it. Before the elections, this past year, I didn't ride my bike outside because there was already so much noise and it had nothing to do with cycling, right? But it was just, I know that to go back out on my bike, I am probably putting myself through like a heightened level of just awareness and I don't want to do it when I'm already under any other sort of duress from anything. So I try and choose good like times a day to ride when I can. And I do often ride with other people. I really enjoy the social aspect. For me, that's a lot of the reason why I continue to ride. So I go out with my husband, I go out with friends, and I try and make it this joyful experience anytime I don't have a good experience, I kind of hit the pause button and try and like really focus on having the good memories to replace the bad ones. But it took building it up slowly. And when I was digging back into those bad memories, I had to ride inside too. Like during trauma therapy, it wasn't safe, like mentally for me.
How has your own personal family supported you through your trauma and PTS journey? And then how can family members of others experiencing PTSD be supportive to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting because Kennett and I go through this experience very much together. And one thing I'll say that we learned throughout this, and I don't think often gets shared, is um, it makes sense when people hear I have PTSD from the event. I have scars on my face. It's pretty obvious that I've been through something traumatic. What sometimes gets forgotten, and it even took us a little while to learn, is that there's this, it's called secondary trauma. So there's people that are around whoever got hurt, and they can also experience a good deal of trauma. And so when I went through that crash, what I read to you of the book, like my mind did go blank. I don't remember 5 days of my life. And I was given pain medicine to take away the pain, sedation meds, and my body just kicked into its own flight or fight, of responding to the event. my husband came across the crash scene. He saw not me, but he saw the crash scene. He had to go to the hospital. He didn't know if I was alive. And so he has his own set of, um, he has his own trauma. So I guess I should say it's interesting to go through it with him, because I can see PTSD in him and he can see it in me, and then we can kind of support one another. So some things that, when we're riding together, which riding is probably the easiest way to experience PTSD. If a driver buzzes past us and is really aggressive, both of us have a reaction that's way stronger than a cyclist who hasn't been hurt on the road. But it helps one another to we can calm each other down and recognize it. And I think for me, having him nearby riding is just a sense of safety even. So those are a few little things. Is just recognizing when PTSD appears, I think, is the biggest thing.
Can you speak more to the changes in Colorado that you have advocated for?
Yeah, so the big one, I talked about how I was out training, but I was also a commuter. And after the crash, I was released from the hospital, but I had to go back to appointments daily. I also, even to this day, I don't know that I would choose to live without a vehicle anymore, because I need to acknowledge that there's days where, like I said, if PTSD is hitting hard or I just don't feel up to it, I need to not put my body under the duress of commuting down the main road where there's no bike lane to get to the wherever in bad weather where everyone's swerving. I need to pick and choose my moments to be on the bike. And so what ended up happening was we were this car-free family and we had to have a car. And that drove me nuts, because when that driver hit me, I lost my primary mode of transportation. He was at fault and he got to keep his primary mode of transportation, even though he had hurt so many, or not hurt so many other people, but he had, he had a record of doing this, of being a poor driver, and yet he got to keep his license. So from the get-go, that was a really important thing for me. And my attorney for the civil case is the president of Bicycle Colorado. So when I was very vocal to him initially about how I thought it was super unfair, he heard me, and it started to become something that was talked about within Bicycle Colorado. I ended up testifying in front of the Senate and House, and it was discouraging because it took several years. It didn't happen, on the time frame that I would have wanted it to happen. It was probably 4 years after the crash that there's now a vulnerable road users bill in Colorado. If you hit somebody and cause serious bodily injury, you won't lose your license. You will have it suspended for 12 months. Being an advocate for cycling and really pushing for changes to happen also helps me feel like I'm in control of the situation. If I want to ride and continue to enjoy riding, I have to make sure I'm doing everything I can behind the scenes to keep it a safe experience. And that means showing up to transportation meetings and being loud. And I've worked with some of the law changes that have happened in Colorado, and I stay informed with our advocacy groups. And so that keeps me feeling like I'm not only protecting myself, but everyone else that I love that rides, because I'm still pretty well connected. So even if I were to stop riding, I'd still have to be worried about all these other people that I know. Well, I think I started writing the book for more of the physical recovery part of it, but it was really fascinating to me just how different it felt to have this physical wound that everyone could see and the support that I got from it versus what I often deal with behind closed doors, that I really wasn't getting support from and I didn't know how to talk about. And so once the crash happened, I had this really interesting, we talk about physical injuries versus mental. health and like how they're treated differently. And I had this side-by-side comparison where I was like, whoa, I wanted to be honest about what it actually looked like to recover.